Thank you very much indeed for that introduction. It's great to be with you all. I think what strikes me about B Corp and B Labs is that innovations are often too early, actually, more often too early than too late. And that often you can come up with an idea, and actually what you're waiting for is the idea is sort of hovering around, and then it meets a big force, a big change in society, which it helps to articulate, and that's what gives it its momentum. And I think that's probably what's happening to you now. So the context for that, I think, is that we all know, don't we, that there are big questions and challenges to really fundamental systems that we depend on and work with. Fundamental challenges to our economic systems, which have been growing over the last 10, 15 years. Now, clearly, because of the climate emergency, that's compounded, but also deeper questions about the role of finance, the scale of inequalities that are being created. And you can see those sort of big questions then reflected in questions about systems which sit beneath those bigger systems. So huge debate about the future of food systems, huge debate about the future of energy systems with renewables and batteries and nuclear and all sorts of other options in the mix. Huge potential to change mobility systems, micro-mobility, electric mobility, but also renewing public transport and other things. And you can see these debates spreading into the future of health systems, education systems, care systems. So what's remarkable, I think, about the time that we're in now is not just that there are these big challenges, but that these also mark huge opportunities. And not just that there are questions, but there are radical proposals. So more and more you see around a sort of almost like a new map of proposals coming out of people suggesting new things. So I don't know if I'm actually controlling the screen. The question that I want to start you with is, I'm not quite sure which way this is all going. Helena, could you just go back to the beginning of the presentation? There. So this is the question which I thought I should try and answer, which is, I think some of you might think, okay, we're companies, we want to be stakeholder driven, we have multiple accountabilities, but we're still companies. What could we do to change these bigger systems? Why is that our job? And what on earth can we do to influence these bigger systems when we have enough just to run our companies? So that's the question I want to answer. If you move on, Helena. The search for new systems with new purposes creates new ways of life, and that creates new markets and new industries. And so there is both huge, I think, responsibility, but also huge obligations on business to open up the systems of the future that will create new ways to live. If you move on. So a lot of the proposals that we're talking about for new systems are not about innovating within the current system. One of the dilemmas, I think, for B Labs and B Corps and the whole ESG movement and responsible investment is this an innovation within the current system to adapt metrics, measures, forms of investment to improve their performance and to mitigate their side effects? Or is it actually the opening to a different kind of system altogether? And I think that's the moment we're in now to explore whether that is possible. So if you move on, Helena. So this is our very sophisticated model of systems change. We call it the washing machine. And we think we're in the middle in many of these systems of a sort of washing machine of change, where dominant regimes, dominant ways of working, business models, metrics, values, are increasingly struggling to maintain their dominance, and there are developing new and entrepreneurial initiatives coming up to challenge them. But it's very unlikely, I think, that these entrepreneurial initiatives will simply replace the dominant regime. And often there's a coming together, and it's this coming together of the old and the new that creates this sort of vortex of change in the middle. And you see, if you move on, Helena, you see that out of this process, there are many, many different players who play a role in this. They range from entrepreneurs to people inside systems who can see it from the outside, insider outsiders, we call them. They might be consumers who are early adopters of new ways of life. They might be investors who are speculating and trying to create the future. They might be evaluators who are creating new frameworks for thinking about value. And one of the challenges of systems change is that you have to really bring together all of these players in a concerted, emergent, but concerted effort to shift a system. And I think you can see in this how different roles might be played by business. So what we're interested in, if you move on, Helena, is a model that developed by a guy called Frank Giels, which is a multi-level perspective on systems change. And Frank's model says there are basically three levels: the macro, which is the landscape of economic conditions, social values, demography, perhaps. There's the meso level, the middle, which is he calls the regime of institutions, technologies, markets, the structure of the regime, the thing that makes everything work. And then there are sort of the micro level where you have new niches developing, where you get not just new technologies or new businesses, but new ways of life emerging, alternative value systems, which can challenge the existing order. So if you move on, the Frank's model of systems change is that often these three levels are stable to begin with. There's a process of alignment. They all fit together, and you can think of, say, the post-war mass production, mass consumption, Fordist economy of the sort of 40s to 70s as being at such a period of alignment. He then says there's often a shift in the conditions, and we're going through radical shifts now in the conditions for the economy, in which the new proposals emerging from the niche gain a certain traction and coherence, and then they start to both compete with, conflict, and disrupt the existing regime. And eventually, out of the other side, you get some kind of realignment of both the landscape, the regime, and the niche, and you get a new kind of system emerging. So how does that happen then? Let's just take a quick example of something that happened to create that kind of system change. If you go to the next one, Helena. This is the story, of course, of, that's fine. This is the story of Thomas Edison, famous for many inventions, one of them the light bulb. But here's two things. The first is technology is never enough for an innovation. The second is Edison didn't invent the light bulb. He was one of the people who developed it after its invention. And critically, what Edison realized was that he needed not just a product, he needed a system. And one of the reasons he realized that was that he invented the phonograph. And the phonograph was a product without a system. Brilliant product, but no one knew what it's for. So Edison realized that actually, next slide, he had to link the light bulb to a system of producing electricity and distributing it. And that's what he created in downtown Manhattan. And this linking of the generation and the distribution and the use of electricity then led to, if you go to the next slide, a period in which an entirely new system was created. And that was really on show at the Chicago World Fair in 1893. So it's 15 years between Edison unveiling his light bulb and this system of hundreds and thousands of light bulbs being on show in Chicago. So what happened to make that shift from product to system possible? Next slide. Well, actually, it was Edison who was in competition with the guy with the big mustache at the bottom there, Westinghouse. And they had a huge competition over what kind of system or what kind of technology would be used. And it was eventually the alternating system of Westinghouse that won out. It wasn't Edison's direct currents. Critical player in that was Tesla, who came up with many of the machines that would use this system. Also critical player, JP Morgan. So what you see in this next slide is the creation of a kind of minimum viable system, if you move on, Helena. And really what we need now are new minimum viable systems, not minimum viable products, but minimum viable systems, if we move on. The question is, who's going to create the minimum viable systems of the future? And if we move on again, if this is where this space here, this is where minimum viable systems get created, and these minimum viable systems are visible attractors of investors, consumers, collaborators, and others to create the systems of the future. So here I think is where your role as B Corp comes in, if you move on, Helena, because I think it's in that space that you need to operate. Next slide. Actually, if you just go back one. Yeah, so I think this is where you need to think that you are now operating. Can B Corp together create the new minimum viable systems, which will act as visible attractors for the systems of the future? And can you create ecosystems and coalitions, which will reveal new market opportunities and lifestyle opportunities, new ways to live, new ways to create value around a new shared sense of purpose? If you move on finally, what might that mean? Well, it will mean a lot of action in the middle to develop business models and organizations and ecosystems. It might mean creating new measures of value, unusual partnerships. At a landscape level, it's going to be about new narratives and new social values and new frameworks. And at the bottom, it's going to be about embracing new kinds of lifestyles. So if you finally move on, Helena, thank you for all your help. So the answer to this question, we have companies to run, why systems change our job, is this, the final slide. Which is, so this is my sense of what is possible for you, is that working together, B Corp can collectively, create the visible attractors for the systems of the future. And those will attract people to invest and embrace those systems, to learn how to live different, better kinds of life. And it's the creation of those minimum viable systems which will open the door to the future, which I think should be the mission of the B Corp movement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlie, for your presentation. I think that, it's really appropriate, your presentation and your inspiring thoughts for the moment we are living right now at the B Corp movement. I just want to introduce myself briefly. My name is Pablo Sanchez. I'm the Executive Director of Leadbeater Spain. And I want also to share with you a little bit of following what Charlie was explaining. And also the beautiful setting from Katie and Jonathan about the right moment we are living, right? And what is the position of VLAB in front of this specific historic momentum that we are right now living. For that, I'm gonna just present a little bit our vision as a movement. I'm gonna present also a really nice job we did last year in which was created an interdependence committee to not only develop a new vision for B Lab as a movement, but also to develop a theory of change and understand how we can, as a movement, promote a system change. And as Katie was saying, there has been already 15 years of history of B Lab. We are like teenagers right now, so trying to be really rebels. And we all want somehow to see a change in our system. And we realized that by focusing only on businesses, we didn't have enough tools to promote that change. So we just developed a vision that was so compelling and also ambitious, which is if you can move to the next slide, Helena, is that vision in which we as a movement stand for an inclusive, equitable, and regenerative economic system for all people on the planet. And as you can see, this is quite wide, quite open and ambitious, that needs different kinds of skills, needs different kinds of people and actors to be involved. And then for doing that, we just had to, we thought, okay, let's try to build really a movement. Let's try to build a theory of change that drives this system change. And echoing a little bit Charlie's concept about the washing machine, we all know that the current economic system right now is creating significant negative effects. And then we are proposing from the B movement as a collective voice to create a new narrative, a new business culture. And I think this is the big change, what businesses stand for, what really they are, what is the role of businesses in society. For doing that, we just developed this 5 global strategy that they somehow shape our theory of change. You can see there, the first one is driving the adoption of B Lab standards to manage the impact of businesses. Second one is about certifying engaging business to improve impact. I think that was the initial focus of our organization, was much more focused on business certification. But as you can see right now, the whole view is just moving towards an organization that is trying to lead a systemic change. And for that, also, we need some other activities like global strategy number 3, in which means to broadcast businesses as an equitable force for good. So also communicating about the role of business in society. Quite important global strategy number 4 is about catalyzing policy change. So also working with policymakers to enable this stakeholder economy that we are aiming for. And finally, the 5th strategy is about developing a network of local, regional, global communities for change. So please keep in mind these strategies, because we are going to ask you in a few minutes to go to a Mentimeter poll and also, reply which one of these is more effective or you think is more effective to system change. So that's as the first strategy, and I don't want to go really in much detail because I know that we have short time, but just to show you some examples of how we put this theory of change into practice. This is not a theoretical exercise, but rather is really an actionable exercise. So for instance, you can see here like our B Lab standards, the B Impact Assessment and the SDG Action Manager that have been broadly used in Europe with more than 30,000 users already. And if we move to the next slide, we also can see how these standards and these impact management tools we are partnering with some other organizations, key organizations, to make impact management mainstream. So recently at the global level, there has been developed this impact management platform in which you can see all these key organizations working in the impact economy, and B Lab is one of them, also providing all the expertise, knowledge to offer guidance to companies to move forward and integrate impact management into day-to-day operations and strategies. And if we move forward to the next slide, we can also see how we are working with governments to encourage impact management. And there are clear and specific cases like the Swiss Triple Impact project that has been developed in Switzerland, in which more than 1,200 companies already have started the journey to understand how can they better contribute to the SDGs and to the 2030 agenda. Or for instance, in Catalonia with the government also, the companies from clusters are using the standards to develop shared value strategies. So just two cases to show that we are also envisioning this change, working with a government. And recently in France, for instance, quite important as well, France has joined forces with the government and several impact networks to contribute to impact management measurement platform in advance of the directive on extra-financial reporting that will come up. So as you can see, also making impact management mainstream. This is one important issue. Then as we move forward, Elena, to next slide, we can also see the B Corp community, how it's growing at the continental level in Europe. Right now, we have close to 700 companies in more than 20 countries, and you might think that those are good numbers. I mean, obviously, we are really proud of each of you joining this community. But I think when I see this number, the huge potential we have ahead, because there are a lot of much more companies that are still left that should join this movement. So, I mean, a lot of opportunities ahead. And then if we move to next slide, we can also see how the combined revenue has been growing of the B Corp community, and right now it's more than 26 billion euros. And if we also sum up all the workers that form the B Corp community, which is the next slide, we can also see this growing opportunities that we have, because it's close to 90,000 people already joining this community. All this data, as I told you, shows how in the last few years, the community is growing. And I think there is a very critical data in which I can just also want to explain is, while we have 30,000 companies using the B Impact assessment, they have registered, but just in this year, 2021, more than 14,000 companies registered. So you can see how we have reached a tipping point. And we have reached really a tipping point in which there is an exponential growth. So we are really in a momentum in which impact management, B Corp community is having this recognition at the European level. So if we move to the next slide, we can also see that it's quite important also to walk the talk, and not only so to community, to society, to consumers, all the actions that the B Corp community is doing. You can see here some examples of media campaigns, communication campaigns like the one in Italy that was, a tremendous successful campaign, Unlock the Change, or for instance, also It's Your Job campaign that was done recently by the COP26. All these actions also want to see how these companies, the B Corp community, is not a community. It's a community of action. It's a community of commitment. It's a community that is walking the talk. If we go to next slide, we could see some other examples. And probably some of you have already joined some of these campaigns like the SDG Action Manager, or even, I will say, the campaign of the B Corp Month that we just do every year. And then we invite you next year to make the biggest campaign ever. So please save the date in your calendar. And when you see the B Corp Month campaign, join that campaign, because it's incredible, the collective strength that we have as a movement. So just put it in your calendar. If we go to the next slide, we will see also how we are working at the policy level as well. It's quite remarkable, the Interdependence Coalition that was formed this year to promote the stakeholder governance model across Europe. This is done, it's a pan-European project, but also at the national level, there are a lot of countries that have already developed legislations that promote the stakeholder governance, like the Société à Mission, Entreprise à Mission in France, or the Società Benefit in Italy, and some other countries in Europe also working in this area of positive lobby to develop new legislation promoting new legal forms for the planet and the people. And finally, but not least, because I think it's quite important as well, and this is one of the remarkable differences of the B Corp community, is the fifth strategy, which means to develop a network of community of change. We understand that we need to work in partnership with some other actors. That the B Lab needs to extend their boundaries, and we are always offering new opportunities for engagement, like the Cities Can Be program that has been already launched in Edinburgh or Barcelona, and also a partnership in Amsterdam City. So also working at the city level to promote the changes. The B Corp Climate Collective task group, in which several companies are joining together forces to develop this agenda for zero carbon emissions economy, or even a nice activity, a nice project, the Comunidad B Locales, which is the Be Local. So how people, self-organizing people, are just promoting the values of the B movement in specific regions. We in Spain, for instance, in Andalusia, had the opportunity to have the launch of the first community B, or even the B Academics network, in which academia is also involved in teaching, in researching about these issues. So really important also how we expand the boundaries of the B Corp movement. And finally, just before going to the Mentimeter poll and going to this last, if you can go to the next slide, Elena, I think that echoing Charlie's word, I think that we are proposing radical proposals. We are just experimenting radical proposals. We are trying to generate systemic change, as you have seen, through all these actions, which means to create a new business culture, to create a new cultural expectations about what business is, to create new legal frameworks, and a new concept of business laws in the economy. So, I mean, this is our radical proposal, our radical transformation, and hope that you also, keep engaged in this process. So, just to see, how do you feel about this question? How do you, how these different strategies resonate to you? We want just to make some questions in Mentimeter. And then, okay, then you have to go, I think that, oh, that's fantastic because the answers are already there. Thanks to the technical team, nice job. And I want just to invite Charlie as a system thinking leader and expert to make a reading of this results that we are seeing right now. We can see that clearly the policy change right now is like a strategy that seems to be most voted. Afterwards, the developing of a network of regional and local communities for change, they seem to be the both winners of this poll. What's your thoughts about these charts?
Well, I think that they're very striking because I would read them as a sign of greater systemic ambition to go beyond individual companies to thinking as collectives and collaboratives. And often that is done at a regional or at a local level, where you get these minimum viable systems forming by players interacting, and those create the working models. So I think it's a sign of systemic ambition. I would say my advice would be be as bold. It's time to be really bold and ambitious and radical, and to be collaborative. You won't change systems on your own. You need to build relationships, and so think of collaborative advantage, not competitive advantage. And the collaborative advantage of the B Corp movement is a huge potential asset for you.
Love this concept of collaborative advantage, and yeah, love it. So if we go to next results, I think that also we are just asking people, if you can go also to Mentimeter again and use this code that is on the top of the slide, and see, your own position, to which one of these strategies you think you could contribute better to. So let's see, what is the energy of the B Corp movement? What is the engagement of the B Corp movement? Let's give like a couple of seconds to start seeing the results. Unfortunately, we have an unexpected result here, in which the policy change was like the highest rank global strategy, but at the same time, we have less skills on that. So, I mean, we have to work on that, Katie. We have to sum up some skills for doing that. Huh? Yeah, I think, I mean, we can see, I can see that developing network for change is where a lot of energy goes on, and also in the certifying businesses and engaging businesses within the community. So, thank you for your replies to your answers. I think that during the next sessions, we are going to have the opportunity to keep understanding how we can contribute to reach this systemic change. We are reaching a critical mass. Let's work together to make this change happen. And as the poet says here in Spain, Antonio Machado, se hace camino al andar, no hay caminante, no hay camino, se hace camino al andar. So let's walk the talk and have a nice session, have a nice evening, and I hope that we all can learn from this experience.